Hey guys! How are all of you beautiful people doing? I hope you all are having a great day. And yes, this is the next part, my Pokemon world. What would you do if you had the chance to go to a world of your choosing with the perfect start and unlimited possibilities? Well, that is what our MC received. This is a story following the birth of the strongest trainer to ever walk the planet. Going region by region, league by league, champion by champion in order to chase after his ever-fleeting sense of accomplishment. Fans scream out his name every time he enters the arena, opponents forfeit when they meet his gaze, his combat style, unforgiving to even the smallest of mistakes. Soaring above the sky itself, his figure fades from the eyes of all those who he has defeated, never to catch up. So without any delay, let's start the series. Commander Venusaur use synthesis. He could still hang on thanks to Venusaur learning synthesis, and having Sunny Day up means that he would get to almost full health again. The commander smiled happily. Commander Venusaur use Leech Seed. Rex smiled before looking towards Machoke, who was panting lightly. If it came down to a drawn-out fight, Machoke would lose 100% of the time. Having thought of this, Rex needed to end the fight quickly. Rex use Crush Grip. Machoke rushed forward at a fast speed towards Venusaur. Naturally, Venusaur didn't stay idle and sent out Leech Seeds at Machoke. Seeing the pods coming towards him, Machoke simply jumped up into the air, avoiding them completely. The commander smiled at the sight. Commander, use Poison Powder, he commanded with an ever-growing smile. Rex face-palmed. Machoke was in midair and didn't have a way to avoid it. Rex, Machoke, slap your hands together at full strength, he said quickly. Machoke followed his instructions and slammed his palms together at max speed. The impact caused a massive torrent of air to flow outwards at immense speed. The poison powder that was making its way over was blown into the wind. The commander's face sunk, since he was sure it would be successful. He quickly calmed down and commanded once again. Commander, spread poison powder all over the ground, he said with a grin. Rex was stunned at the man's ingenuity. Machoke couldn't move in time to clap again and fell right to the ground where all the powder was. A cloud of purple burst outwards before Machoke could be seen, with hints of deep purple all over his body. It was a severe poisoning. Rex grimaced at the sight. He was now on a timer. He clenched his fists tightly. Rex, fuck it. Machoke, let's go full power fire ice fusion, he yelled. The commander was curious as to what the kid was yelling. He had never heard of that move before, but he couldn't think any further when a massive torrent of air burst forward, smacking his face. He couldn't breathe properly from all the air blowing by his face. Machoke could be seen with glowing arms of two different colors. One was bursting with deep blue flames while the other was covered in pale blue ice, forming a sort of armor. The reaction between the hot and cold air created a shield around Machoke. Commander Venusaur burst him apart. Use Solar Beam, he shouted. Venusaur quickly charged up a solar beam and sent it blasting towards Machoke at fast speed. Machoke just stood there with a cold gaze as the beam of light made impact with the air shield. The light was absorbed into the shield before dissipating, showing the still okay Machoke. The commander was thoroughly shocked. Machoke was not okay either and coughed a little before falling to one knee. The poison was acting up again. Rex's face turned into a deep frown. He played too much. He underestimated his opponent in order to help Machoke increase his strength, and now he was paying for it. Rex, fuck, I'm such a child, I keep doing this, now my Pokemon suffer due to my arrogance and greed. Rex, Machoke, I'm sorry I have let you down, let's finish this and get you healed up, Use blast cannon at full power, don't hold back at all, who cares about the consequences? He yelled. Machoke was surprised at Rex's words but understood what Rex was feeling. He had known Rex for a while now and aura allowed him to feel the emotions Rex was feeling. Sadness, self-blame and anger fused into one inside of Rex. Machoke laughed since this was typical of Rex. He also knew that it was a mistake to act the way they did which led to this situation, but he didn't regret it. Without setbacks one cannot grow. He smiled at Rex and burst out with an ungodly amount of energy. He had mixed his aura with his ice-fire fusion which they hadn't tried before. It was dangerous and experimental, but it wasn't the time to care about the details. It was win or lose and he wasn't about to lose. He channeled all his remaining energy into his arms which exploded out with massive amounts of fire and ice respectively as a result. The flame got lighter blue which signified its heat increasing exponentially. His ice got colder and colder which made the surrounding air freeze causing snowflakes to appear. He raised his arms pointing them at Venusaur. The commander was aghast at the sight. This was not a move a Pokémon should be able to make, too much energy. Commander Venusaur use maximum power solar beam. He shouted quickly. Venusaur also sensed the exponential increase in power coming from Machoke and tried his hardest to absorb as much sunlight as possible. Even with Sunny Day it took almost a full 5 seconds to load, and Sunny Day subsequently vanished afterwards. Machoke had finished charging as well and both released their moves simultaneously. The two attacks shot towards each other leaving a 5-meter deep trail as they burst forward. One was full of light so bright it was blinding and the other was so explosive and destructive that it destroyed everything around it. They finally clashed and the sound was so loud that it deafened the commander and Rex. The blast uprooted the trees, cracked the earth, and blinded everyone at the scene. All the Pokémon had fled way before the two attacks had even met. Rex and the commander had retreated to a safe enough distance but were still impacted. The amount of smoke was enough to suffocate a town. The wind rose and carried it away revealing the aftermath of the attack. It looked like the result of a miniature nuclear explosion. It was just barren and flat everywhere within 50 meters. In the middle of the barren land stood two Pokémon of contrasting colors. One was bright green and the other was black as the abyss. They both stared at each other for 5 seconds before they fell simultaneously. Rex was shocked. This was the first time Machoke had fainted in a battle against another trainer. Rex was running towards Machoke when he saw him raise an arm. Machoke now had a severe purple undertone amidst his black colors. The poisoning was immense. Machoke pushed himself off the ground using his arms with his sheer willpower. He was screaming in an attempt to increase his power before finally managing to get to his knees where he stopped. He looked at Rex before raising his arms in victory. Rex smiled helplessly at the guy. He never wanted to be outdone, but before he could step forward, Machoke spat out blood and dropped to the floor. Rex's mind blanked for a second before a surge of immense power came through him before blasting towards Machoke. Rex put his arms under Machoke and attempted to feel his pulse. Bewdump. 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 It was incredibly faint, but he was alive. Rex shed a tear before sighing in relief. He raised his head and gazed at the frozen commander who stood there like a statue under his vicious look. He pulled out a Pokeball and threw it out. A massive blood-red Gyarados came out and looked around before seeing Machoke in Rex's arms. Gyarados froze and stared at Rex in questioning. Rex nodded towards the commander with a vicious glare. Gyarados turned his head and released his Intimidate to the maximum. The commander, who was barely able to cope under Rex's gaze, finally couldn't resist any longer and collapsed on his knees. "Rex Gyarados, kill him," he said calmly. It was so calm it sent a shiver down the back of everyone present. Gyarados didn't even hesitate and sent a hydro pump so thin that it was hard to see, yet it was so fast it threatened to break the sound barriers and immediately reached the commander. Gyarados moved his head sideways, which made the hydro pump cut horizontally, essentially beheading the man. The commander's head flew from his head and into the sky. The panic and shock on his face were still painted on his pale face as his eyes turned cold and lifeless. Rex stared at the body without blinking, etching this into his brain. Whoever threatened to kill his family would die. Gyarados didn't even blink an eye either, even though this was the first time he had killed someone. This guy had almost killed his senior brother and friend. That was unforgivable. Rex told Gyarados to gently carry Machoke to the Pokémon Center at his fastest speed. Reaching the Pokémon Center, Rex burst through the door, which attracted the attention of everyone present. He didn't care at all. He was carrying the barely living Machoke in with his full strength. "Rex, I don't care what you are doing, save my Pokémon now," he yelled at the rushing Nurse Joy. Nurse Joy looked at Rex, who had a grim face as he carried Machoke in. "Nurse Joy, what happened to him?" she said hurriedly. "Rex poisoned severely, weak pulse, unconscious," he said quickly. Nurse Joy nodded seriously and got a stretcher on wheels before taking Machoke away. Rex looked at their backs until they were no longer visible before a vicious, murderous look could be seen on his face. Rex walked back out and headed towards the Pokémon Tower while pulling 2 Pokeballs out. Scyther and Onix. Rex Onix head towards the back of the tower and create a big hole in the ground. Scyther, you go inside the Pokémon Tower and collect all the bodies as fast as you can. You have 3 minutes. He said sternly with no room to complain. His Pokémon had never seen him like this and didn't complain and rushed forward. Rex walked into the tower and headed to the top floor where Mr. Fuji was, since he needed to make sure to entertain them until Scyther was done. Making his way up the stairs to the 6th floor, Rex noticed something or someone directing their gaze at him. It was intense and full of curiosity and passion. Rex didn't know what was going on but made sure to make a mental note of it and take care of it when he went down again. He soon arrived back at the 7th floor to find a crying Cubone, an illusory Marowak and a teary-eyed Mr. Fuji. It seemed that they had finally reunited, and it was a bittersweet moment, especially for Rex, who had almost lost his best friend. Rex looked on from a distant corner in order to not intervene with the special moment. After all, it would be annoying if a stranger burst into the middle of it, ruining their moment entirely. Soon the Marowak disappeared as it embraces Cubone one last time. The emotional tears from Cubone along with its begging screams pulled at Rex's heart. It made him remember all the times he spent with Machoke, and he couldn't really imagine a time without him. After all, they were especially born at the same exact time. When everything calmed down and Cubone embraced Mr. Fuji as he continued to cry, Rex made his presence known by coughing lightly. Mr. Fuji flinched slightly and looked over before sighing in relief. "Mr. Fuji, thank God you are safe. I thought that it was those Team Rocket punks again," he said with an embarrassed look. "Rex, such little confidence. If I didn't know any better, I would have thought you were hoping for my defeat," he said in a teasing voice. "Mr. Fuji, no, that's not it. He stopped halfway when he realized Rex was pulling his leg. Scyther appeared next to Rex and told him everything was ready. Rex nodded and looked towards Mr. Fuji. "Rex, it is all clear down there. Be careful of the occasional ghost Pokémon, but apart from that it should all be safe," he said with a warm smile. "Mr. Fuji, that's great. What about you though? He asked curiously. Rex shook his head with a smile. Rex, I have something to take care of before leaving. Mr. Fuji, I see that Pokemon that man was talking about, right? I can safely tell you that it was just Marowak's soul looking for Cubone, he said with a smile. Rex, if that's the case then it will be a quick search, nonetheless I would still like to search, he said with a mysterious smile as he quickly peeked at a corner in the room. Mr. Fuji didn't notice anything and only sighed before nodding. Mr. Fuji, thank you young man, come by my Pokemon house later, I have a gift for you as a token of my gratitude, he said kindly before descending the stairs. Rex was intrigued about what it could be, but before doing that he sat down on the box the commander was previously sitting on and stared at the corner that had a flickering shadow. Rex, come out, there is no point in hiding anymore, I've found you, he said with a grin. But the thing that emerged from the shadows shocked Rex to his core. Rex H, how can you be here? He asked, getting up from the box with a jump. 1 week ago, in the Alola region. In a cave full of darkness, ghost Pokemon sped by, popping in and out of the shadows, often playing, laughing, scaring and eating with each other. Amongst these Pokemon was a smaller one, with orange eyes peeking out from the shadows of other Pokemon, observing their moves and memorizing them. It seemed to go undetected as it watched Pokemon fight from within their shadows. It would then spend its time in a solitary cave off to the side where it would eat. It spent all its time copying the moves it learned during the day until it got strong enough to surpass the original user. One uneventful day the sun was setting, and this certain Pokemon decided to venture deeper into the cave where all the other ghost Pokemon were. From the shadows it heard of a ghost world only other ghost Pokemon could enter that lead to other regions full of different Pokemon. Having a craving for new and stronger moves, it was immediately interested in this ghost world. It had already copied all the moves worth learning in this place and was getting tired of staying here. Following one of the ghost Pokemon that was heading towards the portal, they soon came upon a dead end, and before it could flare up at wasting its time, the Pokemon it was following picked up a certain stone and tapped it on another, which to the observing Pokemon's surprise created a ripple in the stone wall, as if it was water. The ghost Pokemon walked in after a little while, followed by an intrigued extra passenger. As soon as they walked in, the Pokemon saw a completely different world, dark sky with no moon or sun, no clouds, purple sand, and rocks everywhere, and a faint trace of ghostly energy in the air. The Pokemon forgot to follow its guide and stood there taking in the scene for a while. It was monotonous after a while since the scenery didn't change, it was perpetually stuck like this. No wind, no smell, it was just eerie and quiet. It headed towards a group of Pokemon that stood around a pillar fighting each other. It was initially excited since there were probably new moves to learn, but upon arrival, it was disillusioned. All the moves that were being performed were ones he didn't deem worthy of memorizing. It stuck around to figure out where it could find the portals to other regions since that was its goal. Days went by, monotonous and boring just like the last. There were only fights, training and eating, with nothing new in sight to hold its attention. It had spent a whole week without finding the way to another region, and it was starting to believe that the news was fake. As it was contemplating, a shadow looked above him before dragging him out of the shadows. It was a big Jenga followed by a haunter and ghastly. Initially frightened, it ran away before looking back to see the trio hot on its trail. It had seen this species of ghost-type Pokemon and knew that it had weak defenses but outrageous attacks. Jenga, who was the leader, threw Shadow Ball after Shadow Ball to no avail, none of them hit. It began to use all its moves, which were helpful in expanding the Pokemon's arsenal of moves slightly. After having memorized everything, it turned around and flew towards the trio before performing the moves just like they did but more powerful. The trio were astounded and shocked at the sudden turn of events. Even when it was 3-on-1, they found themselves completely outmatched. Having realized that they were not going to win, they fled back the way they came. This went on for a couple of days. It was a cat and mouse chase. On one side were the aggrieved and tired trio who regretted their actions, and behind them was a tiny monster charging at them with monstrous attacks. They had never seen a Pokémon learn so quickly and reproduce it with equal or more strength than them. They knew that they might lose it if they went back the same way they came, and therefore changed direction and headed towards the portal they arrived in. Another half a day went by, and it could be established just how big the place was. Soon the trio, who were scared shitless, finally found the portal they took and jumped in without a second thought. The Pokémon that was following was stunned and excited, since unknowingly, it had been chasing them towards a portal that was different from the one it came from, which meant a new region. Without hesitation, it jumped and lost sight for a moment before regaining it. It looked around to see stone walls and tombstones everywhere, with a staircase leading upwards and one leading downwards. Being in an unfamiliar place made it uncomfortable, and therefore jumped into the shadows before observing its surroundings. There were weird-looking animals standing on two legs with black fur and a patch of red on their front in a weird shape. It had never seen them before. But before it could investigate, it saw a man walk up from the stairs with a powerful aura. The Pokémon was stunned speechless. It had never felt this aura on anything before, and there was another more powerful one right behind it like a shadow. It felt intense fear as it looked at the man and Pokémon. But what it saw next made it gasp in horror. The man and Pokémon worked completely in sync and killed everyone in the room before walking upwards without care. It was shocked and curious at the same time. It was confident in its abilities to hide and therefore decided to follow. Following the man and the Pokémon up the stairs, it saw the same that occurred previously repeat itself. The black Pokémon decimated the others with its speed and strength, while the man beat the others. Having never experienced such strength, it decided to follow and see if it could learn anything from them. But it didn't seem to be the case, as they arrived at the 7th soon after. After the strange people talked, one stayed back while the other two walked down the stairs. Following them down and outside, it headed towards the back of the tower. There it saw the monstrous power of the two Pokémon that blew its mind. It had thought that it was pretty strong, but after seeing their strength it began to think otherwise. The black Pokémon releases a move it had never seen before, and it wasn't something that it could understand at the moment, which further intrigued it. Witnessing the devastation caused by their final moves frightened it to no end. Seeing the state of the two Pokémon shocked it. The black Pokémon, which it had learned was a Machoke, was on the ground unconscious. It witnessed the fury on the man's face and saw him chuck out a red and white sphere before a massive blood-red Pokémon it had never seen came out. The move it pulled off was also something it couldn't pull off, neither could it even understand what it was. Following it back to the center and then back to the tower, where it witnessed a scene so bizarre it thought it was hallucinating. A purple illusory image appeared and hugged a small Pokémon before disappearing. Before long the older man and the little Pokémon left, and in its place the man it had been following sat there quietly. It had been with the man for a day, and it had experienced more exciting things than it ever had in its life. It was fascinated by the Pokémon the man had and their moves. Moving about in the corner, it soon heard the man's voice directed at it to its disbelief. "Rex, come out, there is no point in hiding anymore, I've found you," he said with a grin. It was shocking, as it didn't think that it could be discovered so quickly. It was proud of its hiding ability, since he had only ever been found by one Pokémon, which was that detestable Jenga. It decided not to hide and stepped out of the shadows and into the light right in front of Rex. "Rex H, how can you be here?" he asked, getting up from the box with a jump. Rex was shocked to the core. The Pokémon that was in front of him didn't belong to this region at all. It was first introduced in Alola and it was incredibly powerful stats-wise. He was clueless as to how it managed to get here. The Pokémon tilted its head to the side in confusion at Rex's question. It moved forward and made a fighting gesture as it stood in a fighting position. Rex was once again confused. "Rex, do you want to fight?" he asked hesitatingly. The Pokémon, much to Rex's surprise, it nodded with determination. He sighed before nodding. He pulled out a Pokeball which caught the attention of the Pokémon again. Rex threw it out and Weepinbell came out. It looked around before spotting the black little Pokémon. "Rex, let's end this quickly, Weepinbell, we have to see how Machoke is doing," he said. Weepinbell nodded seriously and looked at the Pokémon in front of it. "Rex, use Vine Whip," he said with a grin. He really liked the move since it now had poison powder covering it. Weepinbell quickly sent out 2 Vine Whips towards the Pokémon. It dodged with much effort before jumping into the shadows. Rex hated ghost Pokémon for this reason, but there was one advantage to fighting this one: it liked to use physical moves. "Rex, Weepinbell, coat yourself in our powder moves," he said with a wide grin. The little Pokémon, seeing Weepinbell doing something weird, dismissed it and found an opportunity to strike. It burst out of the shadows and punched out. The first landed squarely on Weepinbell's chest and got blasted backwards. It was about to get happy when it felt incredibly unwell, drowsy, and had trouble moving its body. Before long it found that it could no longer move, and it felt incredibly bad before falling asleep. Rex looked at the little Pokémon who had dozed off and smiled maniacally. "Rex, well done, Weepinbell. Very happy right now," he said with a wide smile before attempting to hug Weepinbell before remembering that it was coated in powder. It looked awkward as he froze mid-hug. Rex coughed to ease his awkwardness and walked over to the sleeping Pokémon. "Rex, never thought I would see a Marshadow here. Incredibly strong Pokémon with immense learning capabilities. I didn't really think I would find one here, but Lady Luck seems to have fallen for me," he said with a chuckle. He walked over and fed the sleeping Pokémon that looked like it was in pain several berries. The Pokémon soon woke up to find Rex's smile close by. It was startled and jumped away before grimacing in pain. Poison powder seemed to have worked its magic even in this little amount of time. Proved how strong Weepinbell was getting. "Rex, relax little buddy, I won't be hurting you. It was a short battle, and you seem very unrefined, but you have immense potential. How about joining my team?" he asked warmly while extending a hand. Marshadow looked at Rex with a puzzled look, which made Rex laugh. "Rex, right, I forgot to tell you, if you join my team, you will become incredibly powerful, I can promise you that," he said seriously. Marshadow didn't doubt him. He had seen the battle with Machoke and knew that it was insanely strong. It could also feel some type of energy that attracted it to him, which appeared in Machoke as well. Rex saw Marshadow nod its head and found it hard not to yell out in joy. He had just caught a mythical Pokémon. He hastily took out an empty Pokeball and held it in front of Marshadow and explained how it worked. Marshadow was stunned at the feature and found it interesting, so it walked up and pressed the little button with its small hands before getting sucked inside. Without any resistance, it beeped 3 times before clicking. Rex laughed like a weirdo, which creeped Weepinbell out a bit. Noticing the weird look Weepinbell was giving him, Rex scratched the back of his head and returned him to his Pokeball before summoning Marshadow. Rex, you can stay in my shadow, there is no need to return to your pokeball, he said with a smile. Marshadow nodded happily and seemingly melted into the floor where his shadow was. Only a pair of eyes could be seen from time to time. Naturally they could be hidden, it as well was just signaling that it was there already. Rex, seeing that everything was in order, summoned the system so that it could scan Marshadow. Name, Marshadow the Gloom Dweller Pokémon. O level, 25. O bond, 50%. O height, 0.7 m. O HP, 130. O attack, 175. O defense, 120. OSP. ATK, 130. OSP. Definite, 130. O speed, 175. O ability, Technician. O moves: Assurance, Counter, Drain Punch, Fire, Ice and Thunder Punch, Shadow Sneak, Shadow Punch, Shadow Claw, Shadow Ball, Laser Focus. Rex was astounded and very happy. He almost resembled Machop when he first arrived here, and even had most of the same moves. He would probably teach it all the moves that Machoke has learned and will serve as an amazing partner for him, since Marshadows tend to be able to show more power with the move than the original owner. It would push Machoke to be better, which was always welcome. Rex walked out of the tower under the frightened gaze of all the ghost Pokémon and headed towards the back where Onix was waiting by a huge hole. Seeing the hole, Rex was satisfied and then turned his head towards the piled-up corpses to the side. His face was gloomy and turned towards Onix. Rex put them all in the hole and cover it up to make sure it looks the same here as when you arrived, he said before sitting down and taking a quick nap from all the stress. He was awoken by Marshadow when it noticed that Onix was done. Getting up and seeing the once colossal hole now gone with no signs of tampering, he nodded in satisfaction and returned Onix to his Pokeball after praising him. He then walked towards the Pokémon Center where Machoke was being treated. He asked Nurse Joy and she told him that it would take a while before Machoke came out of intensive care due to the near-death state he was left here in. Rex was just happy to be reassured by Joy that he was going to be fine. Walking out of the center, Rex looked up at the orange sky with a half-visible sun peeking over the horizon. Rex, let's go see Mr. Fuji and see what he will give me, he mumbled before walking down the dirt road towards the Pokémon house. Arriving at the same old house, he walked and looked around to see Reina sitting down on a wooden bench holding an Oddish in her arms. Rex, hello Reina, would you happen to know where Mr. Fuji is? He asked warmly while observing the cute Oddish. Reina lifted her head up after hearing the familiar voice and found Rex standing there. Reina, Rex, I'm glad to see you. It seems you were successful in spooking those Team Rocket fools away. Mr. Fuji said that he didn't see anyone there when he was walking down, she said happily. Rex scratched the back of his head while forcing a laugh. Rex, yeah, they sure ran fast, he said before thinking of all the broken legs he saw in the tower. Reina, about Mr. Fuji, he is in the Pokémon zone taking care of Cubone. Follow me and I'll take you to him, she said with a smile while waving at him. Rex followed through the same doors leading to where all the Pokémon are held and saw the same smiles on everyone's faces, especially the Pokémons, which soothed his soul a bit. He soon saw the same old man with bushy eyebrows talking to a little Cubone who was much happier than before. Rex soon approached the old man, which caught his attention. Upon seeing that it was Rex, the old man sprung to life and jumped up before shaking his hand enthusiastically. Fuji, Rex, glad you could make it. I have the thing I promised in my study, if you would follow me, please, he said before turning 180 degrees and walking through another door going deeper into the house. Rex followed calmly and soon reached the room. Inside was a normal study, a shelf full of books. Rex had no clue what they were about, nor did he care to know. A couch, a computer and a desk made of dark wood illuminated by the golden-orange sun evening light. "Fuji, please have a seat. I have what I need right here," he said, sitting in his chair before reaching his hand towards the bottommost drawer where a safe could be seen. He put in the code and soon held a small box covered in red leather, and a weird symbol embedded in it. Rex had seen this symbol before, but he didn't quite believe it. He needed to confirm his suspicions and therefore held in his curiosity. Mr. Fuji slid the box over the desk and opened it up to see a blue and black stone inside. Rex was pretty certain that this was Charizard's system has scanned had found it to actually be a very rare Arcanite stone used to Mega Evolve Arcanine, it said to Rex's shock. "Rex, if you don't mind me asking, sir, where did you get this?" he asked with great curiosity as he kept eyeing the stone. "Fuji, me and Blaine go back many years and we used to do research together on a cinnabar island." Blaine, being the eccentric fellow that he is, went exploring inside the caves there and came across this stone embedded into the rock. He said that his Arcanine had an immense reaction to it, but he couldn't quite tell what it was. He had been holding on to it for a very long time, and after so long and noticing no effect, he sent it to me to study in hopes of finding a clue, he said with a smile. "Fuji, that was a decade ago and I still can't find a clue, so I thought that maybe you could do something about it. But do you have an Arcanine or a Growlithe?" he asked. "Rex, oh, if only you knew what you have in your hands, old man, and that Blaine dude is an idiot for hand this away," he thought while laughing madly in his mind. "Rex, yes, I caught a Growlithe just recently, and as for the stone, doesn't Blaine want it back?" he asked. What was the point of taking it if he couldn't keep it permanently? "Fuji, he doesn't want it anymore. It had been with him for such a long time, and after not finding anything about it he grew to resent the stone for wasting his time. He told me to give it to someone if I even found out what it did, so that's why I'm giving it to you even though I still don't know what it does," he said sadly. "Rex, well, Mr. Fuji, if I ever find out what it does, I will be sure to inform you and Mr. Blaine about it," he said with a mischievous grin. Mr. Fuji smiled and gave him the stone before walking him out of the house and waving goodbye. Walking down the street, Rex couldn't help but giggle like an idiot. "Rex Marshadow, do you know how much of a jackpot we just got?" he asked with a massive grin. Marshadow was clueless about what he was saying and only kept silent. Rex smiled awkwardly before keeping the stone in his inventory. "Rex, another mega stone added to the list. Man, my team is going to be overpowered. Can't wait to see what it will look like," he thought expectantly. "Rex, now where to go? Home, got it. Let's go beat the arrogant fool Lieutenant Surge and get myself my third badge. Plus Onyx needs a good battle." Rex slept through the night at a hotel in Lavender Town since Machoke needed to be kept for observation throughout the night. The morning sun shone through the burgundy curtains and onto Rex's face. Getting up and taking a shower, he walked out of the hotel to the fresh breeze with a hint of moisture from the rain last night. The smell of fresh flowers accentuated the pleasant atmosphere that lingered in the town. Rex, along with Marshadow, who was in his shadow, made their way to the Pokémon Center where they would pick up Machoke. The center was empty since it was early in the morning and only Nurse Joy could be seen as usual. "Nurse Joy, your Machoke has made a complete recovery," she said with a smile as she handed Machoke's Pokeball back to Rex. He took it hastily before thanking the nurse and walking out. He immediately threw the Pokeball out and a massive 2-meter-tall Machoke came out with a burst of aura. Rex didn't care and rushed to give him a hug. "Rex, I missed you, buddy. I'm glad you're okay," he said emotionally. Machoke pulled out of the hug and smiled happily before fist-bumping Rex. But his smile soon froze when he stared at Rex's shadow and punched it heavily, which exposed the fleeing Marshadow. Marshadow was shocked that it was spotted and the power that Machoke just displayed. Rex, who saw this, quickly stopped Machoke from continuing. "Rex Machoke, this is our new family member, Marshadow. This is your big brother from now on," he said as he introduced them to each other. Machoke looked down at the small Pokémon with a smile before petting its head amicably. Marshadow seemed to not like it as it began to punch out at Machoke. Machoke only laughed it off as it was too powerful to feel the punches. Marshadow stopped after seeing that it wasn't effective and decided to climb on top of Machoke's shoulder before knocking on his head. Machoke just swatted him away as a person would to a pesky fly. Marshadow was indignant and disappeared back into Rex's shadow. Rex smiled and patted Machoke's shoulder before recalling him back to his Pokeball. Rex then pulled out his bike from his inventory and rode it out of town as he headed towards Vermilion City, where his next gym badge would be. It would take several days as he would need to go through routes 12 and 11 before reaching the destination, but he missed being on the road. He was getting a bit tired of riding a bike, so he was thinking of getting a motorcycle since it would be quicker and more efficient while traversing the place. He already did enough exercise, so pedaling was just too much. As he was thinking this, he made his way over the bridge where a lot of people could be seen fishing. He didn't need a water type, so there was no need to fish, but he did fight all the trainers he could. Marshadow participated in the majority of them as Rex needed to gauge his level of strength and ability. He was pleasantly surprised at the prowess Marshadow showed as he was almost meant for battle. He sparred with Machoke every day, and it was a one-sided beatdown. Machoke pretty much dominated him. Marshadow was able to improve the power of his moves thanks to watching how Machoke did them, but it got to the point where he couldn't anymore. This was due to his lack of knowledge on how to refine his energy. There was a limit to his copy technique, after all it wasn't all-knowing. So, he would mediate under Machoke and pretty much live on Machoke's shoulder, which bothered him to no end. But Machoke couldn't do anything about it. Every time he tried to swat him away, he would disappear and reappear, which made him miss. He was like a demon. Machoke had given up and let the little one do as it pleased. The training increased for all of his Pokémon in order to push them harder. In the meantime, Rex was going over the groundbreaking news the system had revealed to Rex. The system's research has found a way to increase the strength of some of the host's Pokémon, these being Weepinbell and Growlithe. The system has been scanning the Fire Stones and Leaf Stones the host bought in Viridian City and has found a way to use them to increase the strength of the Pokémon. By fusing 3 stones of the same kind together, it will have a qualitative change. The Pokémon will be faster, stronger, and smarter than its own species. The only catch is that it will put the Pokémon into a coma-like state for 1 month. Rex was mind blown. He didn't think this was possible, but he always wondered what would happen if he used more than 1 stone. "Rex, why only 3? He asked. "After all, wouldn't more be better?" System has scanned and found that Growlithe would need to increase his level by 10 for every stone added, which is not worth it in the long run, since, if held back for too long, it will stay a Growlithe forever without a chance to evolve. Being held back hinders and wastes a Pokémon's talent, which would affect it after evolution. System used 3 stones since it is the optimal limit in order to maximize stats and retain talent. It responded mechanically. Rex understood the concept and had to qualms with it. After all, Weepinbell was not very far from level 30, so he would evolve it when it reaches that level, and Growlithe had a long way to go before he was ready. Having processed the information, Rex went to do his aura training with Machoke, and Marshadow joined in as it found aura to be incredibly interesting. Rex found that when it was in a fight some parts of Marshadow would turn green, which was cool. And so, they spent a couple of days like this in Route 12 before encountering a slumbering giant. Rex peered at the snoring mountain in front of him. He was surprised to see a Snorlax here, but it wasn't something crazy since they sleep wherever they want and are very strong Pokémon. He was thinking of catching it, but he didn't like that it slept all day. He had no way of waking it up when he wanted to. Sure, he had aura which gave him the telepathy ability later on, but he already had a tank. Steelix was incredibly strong, and steel types are very defensive Pokémon to begin with. Plus, the system had a way to increase the density of the metal coat by fusing them together like the stones. He was not surprised since it followed a similar process. There was one difference, however. The system recommended finding metals and crystals with incredibly tough compositions in order to increase the defensive capability even more. It was similar to the Crystal Onyx and Steelix line that was introduced into the anime early on. But the system said that if the right metals were incorporated during the evolution, it could create a monstrous Pokémon. A similar process could be applied to Scythe and Scizor, which excited Rex to no end. He was thinking of visiting Professor Oak for many things, such as getting a keystone through his connections to Colossus, and seeing if he could get titanium, adamantium and diamonds, in large quantities. Money wasn't a problem, he could just hack several banks and rob the money he needed. He didn't want to do it, but he had no other way to get the money otherwise. He was excited to see if Scizor and Steelix would be different and if they even resembled the same Pokémon. Smiling widely, he walked by the Snorlax that failed to catch his attention in the least and head towards Route 11, which connected directly to Vermilion City. He rode on his bike and trained with his Pokémon every couple of hours. He trained with Marshadow and Growlithe predominantly since they were the two that needed it the most, being the newest additions to the team. Growlithe had incredible moves for his species and wanted to make sure that he was able to use Morning Sun to its maximum capacity, and therefore started teaching Growlithe Sunny Day. Rex was grinning like a villain, thinking of the faces his opponents would make when they learned that Growlithe could heal for up to half health. Marshadow would practice hand-to-hand combat with Rex, which gave him nightmares. Machoke would shiver involuntarily every time he saw Rex training since it brought up bad memories. He pitied the poor ghost. Machoke and Marshadow became good friends who would spar at every opportunity. Growlithe would get mad and fight Marshadow since he wanted to hang out with Machoke just as much. Machoke would look at Rex pleadingly only to receive a teasing look. Rex enjoyed his team being so friendly with each other since they would be the leaders of the Pokémon he would later catch in other regions. Machoke was the undisputed leader everyone respected, Weepinbell was the brave friendly one, Scyther was the cold detached one, Gyarados was the arrogant and proud one, Onyx was the family guy always making sure everyone was happy. Marshadow was new and was trying to find his place, and Growlithe was just joyful and happy to be a part of the family. Rex ate his food as he watched the funny dynamic and found it incredibly contrasting to his old life, which was cold and lonely. He cherished what he had, and Machoke's experience really hammered in the fact that he needed to try harder. It was getting to his head and it was happening constantly. He would make sure to not catch himself slacking again, not for his sake but for his Pokémons. Machoke saw Rex's pensive look and shook his head with a sigh. He knew exactly what Rex was thinking, they were like brothers after all. Machoke himself knew that he needed to get stronger not only for himself and Rex but for the growing family that was expanding. He turned his head to see Gyarados bullying the fish Pokémon by the lake. Weeping Bill attempting to stop him with a brave face, Scyther coldly watching from atop a tree, Onyx who didn't know what to do, Growlithe who had a smile as he watched everything going on naively, and Marshadow who was practicing on a tree. This was his family, and as the leader, he needed to protect them and be their pillar just as much as Rex was their spiritual one. His was turned serious as he sat down and continued to practice his aura and energy control. The days continued like this, and soon 2 more days had gone by and they were approaching Vermilion City. Rex looked up at the setting sun and decided to camp by the roadside before making his way into the city tomorrow. There was a lot to do there, and it would involve staying in the city for a couple of days. He also decided to change his clothes. He liked what he was wearing, but he decided that it was getting old. He smiled as he thought about the shopping spree, but then frowned as he thought about his money situation. It seemed that he would have to go on a bank heist. He really didn't want to do so, but there was really no other choice. He was by under no circumstances going to take from others' accounts, though. He was thinking about taking it from the League Committee since they always had money to spare. Shaking away the thoughts, he focused on the dinner he was cooking for his Pokémon before heading to bed. The next day he packed up his tent and stored it in his inventory before getting back on the road. There was about 10 kilometers before he would reach the city. He didn't rush though, and instead decided to cycle at a steady pace as he took in the scenery. He really loved the Pokémon world. No pollution, garbage wasn't everywhere, which made him happy. He did know that there were poachers and Pokémon traffickers, but there was nothing he could do about it. There would always be people who decided to do it, and he really did have the energy to play hero all the time. He thought about how he was going to hack the bank and decided to ask the system about its capability. Rex system, how does your hacking function work? The system will need to host to be inside the bank. There will be no fancy actions needed, only sit down and wait for the process to be done. Alarms will not be set off, and the host will not be put in danger or found to be guilty. The system is untraceable, it said mechanically. Rex was finally able to calm down, since now there was no reason to be on edge, or worse, have to actually raid the bank or sneak into a special place within the bank. Rex soon reached the city gates and was met with the very similar officer Jenny that scanned his ID and asked about his purpose before allowing him to enter. He made his way over to the nearest good quality hotel and checked in for a couple of days since there was a lot to do. Rex walked out of the hotel afterwards and headed towards the bank since money was the thing he needed the most. Upon arrival, he saw a couple of guards inside, cameras in the upper corners of the building. Inside the bank itself was luxurious, couches lined up by the windows, a marble floor, and counters separated by bulletproof glass. It was very tasteful, and the smell was very nice inside, fruity and pleasant. Rex looked around before deciding to sit down on the couch by the window. Rex system, get to work, hack into the League bank account and get 2 million in funds, he said in his mind as he pulled out his phone and began to scroll through the internet for things he needed to buy later. Roger, host's request has been verified, the time needed, 15 minutes. Rex nodded slightly and kept scrolling through. There was the steel he needed to buy. Titanium wasn't too expensive since there were technologies around and an immense amount of space around. The Pokémon world was about 10 times that of Earth, so resources were abundant. He also checked for tungsten since it was known to be the strongest metal on Earth, and it seemed to be the case here as well. It was incredibly expensive, and knowing the massive frame of Onyx and how big Steelix was going to get, he thought that maybe 2 mil wasn't enough. Rex system, up the amount to 10 million, he said after a bit of thought. Roger. Rex nodded happily and checked the price of diamonds next, and they were just as expensive. he was happy that he decided to up the number of funds. Rex then looked into the dealerships and looked into cars and motorcycles. He didn't really need a car yet, and he wouldn't be able to experience the feeling of fresh air on his face if he bought one, so he decided on a motorcycle. He was sick of pedaling like a slave. He found 2 bikes, one for road and one for off-road. The road one was something that looked like the 2021 Ducati monster bike, which was fast and looked great. He was going to get it in black and red. The off-road one was simple, a motocross bike with a simple look, black in color of course. He was excited to go over and buy it, but for now, he needed the money. Next, he got onto a website that made tailor-made suits at a record speed of 2 days. He loved 3-piece suits all his life, and this one wasn't an exception. Sure, he liked what he was wearing, but he was always a classy guy, and having lived his previous life in a uniform influenced it. He smiled as he ordered the suits to his measurements. He ordered 2 in grey, 2 in black and 1 in navy blue. He was so excited that time passed quickly, and before long he heard the system again. "System has transferred the funds to the host's account," it said quickly and mechanically as usual. Rex nodded happily and jumped off of the couch and walked straight out the door. The guards were confused as they saw him come and go, since he never even did anything except sit on a couch for 15 minutes. Rex made his way over to the dealership and walked straight to reception, where a young lady in an exceptionally tight dress was sitting. Her blonde hair, brown eyes and glasses really was a sight to behold. Rex observed for a little while before smiling and walking up. "Rex, hello, I've come here to buy 2 bikes, I was wondering if you can help me find them," he said calmly as he approached the desk. The lady, who was tying away enthusiastically, looked up and was stunned for a moment before registering what Rex had said. "Receptionist, sure, I can do that. What were the 2 bikes you were after?" she asked with a smile. Rex showed her the 2 bikes and she nodded before getting up and signaling for Rex to follow as she headed into the actual shop. Rex would look at her swaying hips from time to time and couldn't help but admit, women were a piece of art in a way. It was fascinating to see how a life form could become so attractive. Sure, art was subjective, but some art was universally loved, he thought with a faint smile as he followed behind the woman. They soon arrived at the Ducati and Rex didn't hesitate to buy it with everything needed. He bought a helmet that was fully black that was tinted so that you could not see his face. He then went over and bought the off-road bike and returned to the desk happily. As he finished paying, he received the receipt. He saw an extra number on it and looked up to see a winking blondie. Rex smiled devilishly before walking away, but as he did so he dialed the number. A phone could be heard going off in the dealership. The woman was confused and picked it up before looking towards Rex. "Rex, what's your name and when do you get off work?" he asked. "Receptionist Nina, and I get off at 5 p.m. she said sharply. "Rex, I'll pick you up at 6 in the afternoon and take you out for dinner. Text me your address," he said calmly and respectfully before hanging up. Rex didn't look back and continued to walk. The receptionist was astounded at the seemingly commanding tone Rex had. She smiled brilliantly before getting back to typing. Rex walked towards a big factory that sold dozens of different types of metals. He wouldn't find tungsten here since he would need to ask Oak about it, but he should be able to find the titanium in the quantity he needed for Steelix and Scyther. The system said that Scyther could have a massive change and possibly even an undiscovered new evolution. Rex naturally needed to buy another type of light, durable but still tough metal, and he found it. A magnesium-based alloy. Researchers from the Sinnoh region have developed a material using magnesium which is light as aluminium, but as strong as titanium alloys. This material has the highest strength-to-weight ratio known to mankind. Having heard this from the system, Rex decided to procure it for Scyther since it would be an incredibly powerful alloy to add to Scythe aka Scissor. Having arrived at the factory, he met with a man with a big beard, short in stature, and basically made Rex think about the Lord of the Rings dwarfs he read about in his past life. The man heard Rex's demand and was astounded not by the metals he wanted but the quantity. Rex needed about 300 kgs of pure highest quality titanium, and 70 kgs of the newly discovered magnesium-based alloy. This would make the majority of Scyther's and Steelix's bodies. Rex oddly felt like a mad scientist, but he trusted the system fully. There was no reason not to. God made it for him after all. Having placed the order, the man said that it would take 2 weeks to get the order and that he will call Rex when the order arrives. Rex was very happy since Scyther was getting close to being ready to evolve. 2 weeks would be enough. Onyx still needed to train a bit more, but he was getting close as well. Having placed the order, Rex left the factory happily and looked at his bank account. Almost 6 million had been deducted after all of these purchases. Mostly the metals cost Rex a fortune and he still needed to buy a couple of metal coats as catalysts for the evolutions. It was bound to be a historical moment when the two Pokémon evolved, not to mention Growlithe and Weepinbell. They'll be incredibly powerful as well. Having accomplished everything, he decided to take a stroll around the city. He walked around a nearby park, ate a light meal at some restaurant since it was early. As he was walking down the concrete footpath, he passed by the gym. It was yellow and had lightning patterns and stickers on the walls. A kid came running out in tears as he clutched a Charmander in his arms. Rex focused on the Pokémon in the kid's arms and saw that it had a broken foot, bruised ribs, and was paralyzed. It was an injury that would take a good couple of days to heal. In his past life, this kind of injury would have been so severe that a couple of months would have been necessary. But here, with the technology available, a couple of days and he would be back to top shape. It was fascinating. He looked at the gym door, which still had its door open, and saw a man with yellow hair wearing a military uniform laughing loudly with 2 other men. Rex grinned viciously before continuing to walk. He would break that Raichu's leg and Lieutenant Surge's arm so that it can feel the same pain they inflict on others. The whole argument of the Pokémon is not at fault is utter bullshit. If the Pokémon wasn't willing, it wouldn't attack. It is not a slave contract. The Pokémon still has free will. It can decide whether it is going too far or not. Rex soon arrived at the forest outside of the city and did his training with his Pokémon before heading to his hotel for a shower. It was 5:30 p.m. when Rex hopped out of the shower and got dressed. It was a shame that his suits were still being made. They would be ready in another day's time. He freshened up, dressed in clean clothes, and walked to an alley where no one was looking. He summoned his Ducati from the system's inventory and hopped on it before putting on his helmet. He turned it on and a roar from the engine could be heard as it sprung to life. Rex could feel the power of the bike under him, which sent a surge of adrenaline through his veins. He smiled childishly before revving the engine and zooming forward. He didn't really care much if he fell since he had the stats of a Pokémon pretty much. Not a strong one and definitely not to the level of Machoke, but still far above average humans. It didn't seem like, since he wasn't a bulky muscle-head looking dude, it was compact and looked athletic, but his body was getting more defined by the day. So a fall from the bike even at full speed wouldn't hurt him much, maybe a skin tear but nothing else. He zoomed by the cars as the wind blew his clothes backwards. It was an exhilarating feeling. He soon arrived at the address that the receptionist Nina texted him as he got out of the shower before. He stopped by the sidewalk under the loud sound of the bike's engine. Nina, who heard the noise, walked out with a beautiful dress on that accentuated her curves perfectly. Rex enjoyed the sight before getting off and taking the helmet off. He walked up and kissed Nina on the cheek before grabbing her hand and leading her to the bike. She seemed to know that they were going by bike since she brought a helmet. "Rex, you look stunning, hop on," he said as he jumped on the bike. "Nina, thank you," she said before jumping on and grabbing around Rex's torso tightly. Her figure stuck to his as her back made a slight curve which further accentuated her peach ass. Rex naturally missed the sight. He set off towards the high-end restaurant he had picked. The trip there was calm apart from the occasional thirsty stares from passerbys and the occasional husband who would get slapped by his wife for peeking at Nina. Rex arrived at the restaurant and helped Nina off of the bike before walking in with his left hand resting just above Nina's hips as he led her inside. They soon met the receptionist, a young man who upon seeing Rex and Nina dropped what he was doing and came forward. "Receptionist, what can I do for you today?" he said while smiling. A light blush could be seen on his cheeks as he looked at Nina. "Rex, I have a reservation for 2:06 p.m. he said calmly. "Receptionist, one moment, sir." The receptionist walked back to the desk and typed something in before returning soon after. "Receptionist, I assume you are Rex Pierce?" he asked while staring at Rex. Rex nodded silently. "Receptionist, very well, come this way please, I'll show you to your table," he said as he turned around and walked into the actual restaurant that was filled with tables. The decor was amazing, the smell was great as it was laced with the smell of food coming from the kitchen not far away. It was quiet, but not because it was empty but because it was common courtesy to talk softly in a high-end restaurant like this. We soon made our way to the table, which was well prepared and spacious. There was a basket of freshly baked bread on the table which caught his eye. In his last life, he had the bad habit of eating too much bread and being full before the food even arrived. Much like a kid would act, which sadly ended up being an inside joke amongst his peers. Rex pulled out a chair for Nina and then sat down on his own before taking a piece of bread from the basket. "Nina, I didn't know you would be taking me here," she said as she happily looked around. "Rex, if I invite, I must treat the guest well, especially when it is a lady," he said courteously. Nina giggled and nodded in acknowledgement. "Nina, so tell me, Rex, what is it you do? Are you from this city?" she asked politely. Rex: "No, I'm from far away, to say the least. I came to Kanto for the yearly league tournament, so naturally, I'm here to face the Vermilion gym leader," he said as he took a sip of the water that was poured for him while he read the menu. Nina: "Oh. A trainer, how interesting. How many badges have you gotten so far?" she asked with interest. Rex: "2, the Pewter City Gym and the Cerulean City one, this will be my third," he said calmly. Nina: "Oh, that's great, you must have strong Pokemon with you, right?" she asked curiously. Rex: "You can say I do," he said dismissively before calling over the waiter. Rex: "Have you decided on a dish?" he asked Nina. She nodded at his question. Rex: "I will have the chicken schnitzel with chips and a Coke please. The lady will have." Nina: "The same thing please," she said with a smile. The waiter nodded and wrote it down before taking the menus with him. Rex and Nina talked for 10 minutes before the food was ready and they dug in. Nina: "So Rex, are you staying here long?" she asked in between bites. Rex shook his head. Rex: "No, I'll be leaving in a couple of days since I need to get all the other badges still," he said as he put another piece of chicken in his mouth. He was a basic bitch like that, always getting the chicken schnitzel. He wasn't a guy who liked to try new foods and always stuck to what he knew tasted good. It seems his bad habit stayed with him. Nina looked a bit sad at his answer but collected herself quickly and continued to eat. They soon finished and paid the bill before walking out. "Nina, how about coming back to my place for a glass of wine?" she asked with a slight blush. Rex didn't think much about it and nodded happily. So far it was a pleasant day, so why not add the cherry on top? He got on his bike with Nina and sped towards her home. The journey was smooth, and they arrived about 5 minutes later at a decent-sized house. Nothing special but modest and had a cozy feeling to it. Nina grabbed Rex's hand and dragged him inside. Not long after the front door closed, the sound of clothes ripping spread throughout the house as a ripped dress could be seen on the floor, followed by a white coat, and so on with smaller articles of clothing leaving a trail towards Nina's room. The next hour was a crazy hour. The sound of a squeaking bed could be heard, and the back of the bed hit the wall making a low thud noise. Rex put a pillow between the frame of the bed and the wall to muffle the sound. There was a sweaty, curvy body going back and forth vigorously as she tried hard to stay on all fours. She would bite down on the pillow she was holding to muffle her moans. Rex was releasing all that pent-up tension he was feeling, and Nina was taking the brunt of it. Naturally, Rex didn't hold back when he was presented with the character selection screen God gave him. There was a lot of details to put in, and one of them was included the size of his little brother, well, more like big brother now. The muffled moans and groans stifled as Rex lay on his back while a beauty rested on his chest, panting, heaving. Rex soon faded into a light sleep. Not long after, he heard the sound of someone talking over the phone. He had great hearing, almost super hearing due to his training, which allowed him to hear most things within 100 meters of him. "Nina, yes, he's asleep. It's almost a shame to kill him, he's so good in bed." "Yes sir, I promise Giovanni will be happy with the result," she said before cutting the call. Rex was shocked. Team Rocket sent a member to sleep with him before killing him. The only upside about the whole thing was that at least he would have gotten some ass before he died, but still, that's just ruthless. Yet, he couldn't bring himself to be mad. They were funny. They just gave him some free ass and he gets to wipe out a Rocket member. 2 birds, 1 stone, fun times. He quietly pulled out a pokeball and released Marshadow. "Rex, hide in the shadows and wait for my call," he whispered, to which Marshadow simply nodded. Rex continued to lay in the bed quietly but had his eyes open. Nina, who had just finished the call in the other room, walked back over. The sound of a gun cocking could be heard as her heels made a clack noise on the wooden floor. Nina, who opened the door quietly, was surprised to see Rex laying there comfortably wide awake with a smile on his face. "Nina, oh. I didn't know you woke up. I thought you were tired," she said as she slowly hid her left hand behind her body. Rex didn't stop making eye contact and smiled even wider. "Rex, Nina, if that is even your name, I have a couple of things to say before you decided to use the gun you are hiding behind your back. A Glock 17 if I'm not mistaken," he said with a relaxed tone and the same smile on his face. Nina was shocked at his calmness and stopped pretending. She pulled the gun from behind her and aimed it at Rex. "Nina, I must say, Rex, I don't know how you can be so calm when you are about to die, but since I like your acting, I'll let you say your last words," she said as a victorious grin surfaced on her face. "Rex, thank you, it won't take up much time," he said with a smile as she slowly sat up. From the corner of his eye, he could see a shadow merge itself into Nina's as a pair of vicious eyes glared at Nina's back. "Rex, let me start by saying, you were great. Didn't know that Team Rocket had such a fine piece of ass laying around. Secondly, How did you know I was heading here? He asked curiously. Nina smiled at Rex like she was staring at an idiot. Nina, do you expect me to actually tell you everything? What do you take me for? She asked mockingly. Rex couldn't help but shake his head. He really wanted to pry the information out of her before killing her, but it seems that won't be possible. Rex, a shame really, said Rex. Nina, what is? She asked in confusion as her finger glided over the trigger. Rex, to waste such a good piece of ass, it's a shame, said Rex as he shook his head dejectedly, looking as if he had lost something precious. Nina, what? She couldn't finish as Rex snapped his fingers. A shadow surged from the ground and punched Nina in the back, which made a distinct cracking noise. Nina, who was originally upright, folded backwards like you would see when you snapped a twig. She couldn't even pull the trigger as her lower spine was shattered. She screamed out in pain as tears streamed down her face. Rex shook his head as he got off of the bed and got dressed. Rex, such a disappointment. You could have died quickly, but you had to act tough, didn't you? He said in annoyance. He then took out a bucket and got up and walked over to the kitchen and quickly boiled some water before filling the bucket with it and walking back before sitting on the chair he pulled over. Nina could hear the sound of water boiling. She had an inkling of what would come next. She tried to scream but was mercilessly kicked in the mouth, which temporarily stopped her from screaming, but before she could start again, she was kicked in the throat, which stopped her from screaming permanently. Rex, you don't need to speak or yell. The neighbors are trying to sleep. I don't need people complaining to me about the noise, said Rex with a grin on his face. She could still feel her upper body but couldn't feel her legs, which made her sob silently. After all, there were limitations to injury recovery. She would probably never walk again. Rex lined up the bucket of boiling water over her face and tipped it over slowly to make sure that it wasn't wasted. The steady stream of boiling water, which was close to 90 degrees Celsius, fell on Nina's face, which caused her to convulse in pain as she struggled to move her head. Soft yells could be heard momentarily before the boiling water scalded the inside of her mouth, ruining it. Rex couldn't help but shake his head. Such a good dick-sucking mouth gone to waste, he sighed sadly before tipping the rest on her face. Rex saw that she was going to go into shock from the scalding water. He didn't do anything and only felt for a pulse. When he realized that she didn't have one, he ushered Marshadow over. Rex, use a very light thunder punch on her chest, he said while pointing just above her perky breasts. Marshadow nodded and did as told and sent a shock from his palm, which made Nina's chest jump as she gasped for breath. Her pulse came back, and she was breathing. Rex, you didn't think I would let you die this easily, did you? He said with a monstrous grin. Marshadow shivered at the sight. Rex pulled her up and sat her on the chair he was previously sitting on and went to the kitchen before coming back with a large knife and a cutting board. He laid the board on the chair armrest and placed Nina's left hand on it. She soon came to her sense and saw what was happening. Her incredibly red, steamy and destroyed face contorted as she attempted to speak while shaking her head vigorously. Rex, you see, I'm not this violent usually, but you pick up some things from the army, sometimes not so pleasant, and you can't complain. You were about to kill me after riding my dick like a whore, he said with a shrug. He started with the thumb and cut at the interphalangeal joint that connected the distal phalanx to the proximal one. As the knife cut through like butter due to Rex's strength, Nina tried to flail around in an attempt to release her hand, only to fail. Her spine was too severely injured. It was a miracle she could even feel her arms at all. He did the same with all the fingers on her left and right hands. She was left with a knob for a hand. No fingers, but she had her plans still attached. He then cut her palms off, then cut the forearm, then the shoulder and left it symmetrical. It looked like the statue of Venus de Milo. When he saw that Nina was gone, her eyes unfocused, he knew he had broken her and sneered. He was a little regretful that he didn't use the counting down by 7 strategy to keep them conscious. Very smart. He made a mental note to try it out on Giovanni when he had the chance. Rex, I hope for your sake you make a better decision in your next life. Such a waste, he mumbled the last part in disappointment while shaking his head. He picked up the gun with his gloved hand and aimed it at her head. Happy travels, if you meet God, send him my regards, he said with a warm smile. Bang! Plop! Nina's dead body hit the floor as a bullet hole appeared in between her forehead. He didn't bother to hide it or try to dress the scene up. There was no way someone would think Nina died by suicide just by looking at her lack of arms, he thought with a chuckle. He simply threw the gun into his inventory and that was it. It was pretty late, and he didn't notice anyone around when he arrived at the house, and there were no cameras in the neighborhood, so there wouldn't be anyone to trace it back to him. He calmly walked over and picked up the phone she was using before and got the system to emulate her voice by using his memory as a basis. He soon dialed the most recent number, and the call went through quickly. Rex, it's done, the pretty boy is dead, I look forward to my reward, he said, sounding just like Nina. He got the system to track the caller and found that it was coming from Viridian City, probably from Team Rocket's HQ. Man, well done, Jess. Giovanni will be very happy. I'll send the money to your account directly. How are you planning to spend your 50 million? He asked. It seemed that this was a thirsty superior who was trying to hit on Nina, who turned out to be Jess. Jess, maybe invite you, he said while trying to hold in his laughter, or was it disgust? He didn't quite know. Catfishing someone was new to him and not pleasant as it turned out. Man, really? That's great, I'll be waiting for your return, he said happily. Rex smiled mockingly and hung up the call. He wondered how the dude would react when he found out Jess was dead. As for the money, it would be collected back by Team Rocket and that couldn't be allowed, so he got the system to hack into Jess's computer and soon found her account. He got the system to disperse the money through millions of different accounts before converging on his account. It was practically untraceable. It was too hard to track since the pattern went of forever. The money would pass through thousands of accounts before they were sent to his. It would take days if not weeks to figure out something, if at all. Now he had tons of money again and he didn't have to steal from others. He really got a lot from this date. Us, money, and a ton of fun. He looked around the house before recalling Marshadow and sending out Marchoke, who towered at 2 meters. Marchoke looked around upon seeing the dead body of a girl on the floor without arms and her digits strewn across the floor. He had the urge to throw up. Rex laughed so hard when he saw Marchoke's reaction and couldn't help but tease the poor Pokemon. Rex, Marchoke, we need to get rid of the evidence. Let's just get rid of the entire house for good measure, he said after a bit of thought. Marchoke looked around and nodded. Rex walked out of the house while putting his jacket on and made his way down the steps. He hopped onto his bike and put his helmet off and zoomed off. Before he made it out of the block, a massive explosion could be heard before the sky was painted blue. Massive blue flames shot up into the air as pieces of wood and house materials rained over the surrounding 10 houses. It was a weird type of beautiful. Maybe Dodara was onto something there, he thought before zooming off. From within the flames, a black figure stood silently observing the effects before nodding and jumping out. The ground cracked and exploded, creating a big cloud of dust as his figure shot into the air. He disappeared just as quickly as Rex. Back at his hotel, Rex made his way over to the roof where Marchoke was waiting quietly. Rex grinned as he put his arms around Marchoke's shoulder and stood there observing the boisterous streets. The hotel was near the retail district of town, and nightlife, although not as big as Viridian City, was still largely active and pronounced. They overlooked the city before seeing a couple of helicopters zooming through the air in the direction he had just come from. Rex couldn't help but smile, and so did Marchoke. "Rex, well done buddy, let's go get a good rest. I have a gym battle tomorrow and you have training like usual," he said, clapping Marchoke's shoulder and walking towards the door that led downwards. Marchoke lingered a moment longer looking at the bright city lights. "Rex, this is not the view you want to see, Marchoke. The best scenery is seen when standing at the highest point, the peak of all life," he said as he thought about being dubbed the strongest Pokémon trainer in the world after going through all the regions, and Machamp standing by his side. It brought a smile to both their faces. Marchoke didn't hesitate or look back and returned to his Pokeball as Rex made his way to his room for the night. The morning sun shone through the semi-closed curtains and shone on half of Rex's face, which served to wake him up. Last night was a busy night and he needed so good rest. When he looked at the time, he was surprised to see that it was already 12 in the afternoon. He quickly got up and got dressed before making his way down and headed towards a restaurant next to the hotel that gave out breakfast. He found himself a seat and ordered himself a latte before opening his phone to read the news. He wasn't surprised when he saw the headlines. "Massive explosion reported in a neighborhood in Vermilion City. The reports say that it happened between 9 to 10 at night. There has also been news that a body has been found, but it has been burned too severely to be recognizable. All that can be made out was that it was a female. Police are investigating since there seem to be signs of foul play." Rex looked at the article and laughed. It seemed that the police were not completely incompetent after all. As of now, Team Rocket should have caught wind of what has happened. "It wouldn't matter too much, I would just need to be more careful to not leave traces behind when moving between cities. Rex system, when in a city or anywhere near people, hack all cameras and blur my figure or directly shut them off. Delete all digital tracks that maybe lead to discovering my location," he said after a little thought. He was sure that Giovanni had Mewtwo ready by now, and he was not confident enough to take on such a monster. Sure, it was not awake in a true sense, so it only had raw power but no experience. But it was still something that he couldn't take on currently. Not to mention that his main ace had a disadvantage against it. He wouldn't take it on until Marchoke evolved into Machamp. By then there wouldn't be many Pokémon that aren't legendary who can take him on in a fight. Shaking away the thoughts that spun in his head, he finished his latte and headed towards the clothing store to pick up his ordered suits. He was eager to put them on. He got on his motorbike that he left beside the hotel in the parking space provided and sped towards the clothing store. It didn't take long, and he soon walked out with a few suits hung over his shoulder. He made his way back to the hotel and changed into a dark grey three-piece suit with a black dress shirt and a black tie. He really did love the look. He put on his black gloves and headed out under the surprised looks of the surrounding people. It was kind of counterproductive since he was trying to hide, but Team Rocket evidently used cameras and other technology to track his movements. So as long as he stops them in this aspect, he will have an easier time. If they make contact again, he is confident in killing everyone that's not Giovanni. Granted, Giovanni with Mewtwo, if he doesn't bring it along, then he can take on Team Rocket with some semblance of confidence. He got on his bike again and rode towards the gym where he would be having his third gym battle. He arrived and parked his bike off to the side before strolling in calmly. It had a typical gym look, clean polished white floors, sliding doors, stairs that led to the second floor where the guests could spectate, and naturally, the battlefield that took a big chunk of the ground floor. He walked towards the reception desk where a gorilla-looking man was seated typing dumbly on a keyboard. The man looked up and was momentarily stunned when he saw Rex and his attire before grinning. "Receptionist, are you here to watch or here to fight the gym?" he asked. Rex battle. Receptionist, one moment. The man picked up a phone and dialed a number. "Receptionist boss, more fresh meat on the chopping board," he said while eyeing Rex with a grin. Rex smiled back while hearing a laugh coming from the other end of the phone. Soon the receptionist hung up and looked at Rex before directing him towards the battlefield. "Receptionist, Lieutenant Surge will be here shortly. I suggest you give up. He's been on a roll lately. You don't seem strong at all. Better save your Pokémon the harm," he said with a grin before returning to the desk. "Rex, it seems that apart from Lieutenant Surge, I'll have to break another's legs." Such a hassle, he thought with a sigh, but the vicious grin on his face revealed his actual thoughts. A man soon walked in with spiky yellow hair, a military uniform, a dog tag on his neck and an arrogant attitude plastered on his face. The uniform was what annoyed Rex the most. As a former soldier and commander, he knew just how sacred and respected a uniform was, so for him to be tarnishing not only the uniform but also what it stands for, he couldn't forgive the man before him. "Lieutenant Surge, well, morphers." Rex cut the shit, "you pompous trash, get to it," he cut Lieutenant Surge off before he could continue his stupid trash talk. Lieutenant Surge was shocked since no one had treated him like this before. He was enraged but smiled when he thought about disabling Rex's Pokémon for life as payback. "Lieutenant Surge, this will be a one-on-one fight, no substitutions. The winner is decided when one Pokémon faints or is unable to battle." He smiled at the last part of the sentence. Rex didn't bother to say anything and immediately threw out Onyx's Pokeball. A massive rock snake came out towering at 15 meters, looking down at Surge before roaring. Lieutenant Surge was momentarily stunned at the sheer size of the Pokémon he was going to face before regaining his arrogant appearance. He chose his Pokeball and quickly threw it out. A Raichu came out and sent out a small electric shock towards Onyx. It seemed to be a cheap shot he would do to every challenger. Sadly, today was different. Onyx didn't even flinch and took the hit. The energy dispersed as if it had hit the air. It wasn't anything extraordinary, it was just due to Onyx's ground typing. Rex smiled at Surge, who had a slightly helpless expression at being caught. "Rex, well, I guess we can start now, right?" he asked mockingly. "Lieutenant Surge didn't say anything and nodded. Rex, Onyx use Sandstorm." Onyx did as commanded and sent a burst of energy outwards that rose a cloud of sand into the air. Pieces of the battlefield rose and began to hit Raichu, which caused a little damage. Lieutenant Surge grimaced. It was already hard enough with his very limited moves and now he couldn't even see. "Rex, use Sand Golem," he said quickly with a smile. Onyx had been focusing on controlling and refining his energy to make it stronger and easier to control. There was a lot he could do with sand now. Onyx sent out a pulse of energy towards the revolving sand cloud, which slowly converged into the form of a giant sand monster that punched out with both fists, drowning Raichu in the sand. The giant disappeared quickly. Lieutenant Surge lost his calm facade when he saw what happened. Due to the cloud converging into a giant, the lacking visibility returned to normal, but he wished he could go back to seeing nothing, since what he was seeing now was far worse. Rex, seeing Lieutenant Surge's face, smiled happily. This was a move the system had come up with. It took a lot of concentration and Onyx couldn't move while he was controlling the golem. Rex dared to use it because Raichu didn't have many moves that could counter or even harm Onyx in any way. He might have Brick Break, but with Onyx's monstrous defense he could tank a good 5 of them before it would turn into a problem. That wasn't even taking into consideration that golem on the field. But this wasn't the end. Naturally, there was more to it. Rex Onyx used Stealth Rocks. It might sound odd to use that move now, but what would happen if Sharp Rocks were added to a Sand Golem? Scary result. Onyx did just that and summoned Stealth Rocks that were quickly absorbed into the golem. They were invisible as they got assimilated, so Lieutenant Surge was none the wiser. Rex Onyx, finish this, slam your fist down. There were no moves the golem could use except its massive frame and tremendous destructive power. The golem, as if answering Rex, raised its first before forming them into a mace-type shape and slamming it down towards Raichu. Lieutenant Surge had snapped out of it and knew that if he was hit by that attack, it would be over. It was super effective after all. Lieutenant Surge, Raichu, use agility and head towards Onyx. He had to disturb Onyx. If he could knock Onyx around, he might cancel the Sand Golem. He would be right. If Raichu was able to push Onyx away and even hurt him, the Sand Golem would disappear. The sand mace covered in Stealth Rocks hit the ground, creating a large crater, but Raichu was already gone. He was next to Onyx already. Lieutenant Surge, ha! Raichu, use Brick Break, he said with a smile. Rex nodded in acknowledgement. It seemed that although he was arrogant, he wasn't completely useless. Rex Onyx, use Sand Shield. Onyx dispelled the golem and the sand that made it up rushed towards Onyx at incredible speed before forming a shield around him. The Stealth Rocks formed invisible spikes that dealt damage whenever someone attacked. This wasn't known to Raichu or Lieutenant Surge and therefore attacked blindly. Raichu smashed its hand down on the shield but was blocked as if it hit a sponge. Before it could move, it was pushed backwards and took damage from the Stealth Rocks. Lieutenant Surge's face was grim since even the surprise attack didn't work. Lieutenant Surge, use agility and Brick Break consistently. There had to be a limit to the move. There must be a blind spot. Raichu did as told and sped around Onyx, constantly smashing against it before disappearing and reappearing somewhere else before hitting again. Raichu would get hurt by the Stealth Rocks at the beginning before slowly becoming faster and faster until the sand couldn't block in time and Onyx was squarely hit in the face with a Brick Break. The good thing was that it didn't do that much damage due to Onyx's defense, even if it was super effective. It could have been worse if it was stabbed, but since it wasn't, there were no problems with tanking a few more. Rex was happy with Onyx's performance and was ready to teach Raichu and Lieutenant Surge a lesson. Rex Onyx, use Dig. He decided to retract Onyx and send him underground for a breather. Onyx complied and went underground quickly. Raichu landed and looked at the hole in the ground disappointedly. Rex Onyx, use Sandstorm again. He needs to have the cover from the sandstorm before dealing the final blow. Onyx complied and sent the sand that had settled on the ground flying again, covering the view of everyone. Onyx then burst out of the ground and smashed its head into Raichu, who was busy deflecting the flying debris. Rex used Sandbind. It was another move he created. It would seal the target in sand, stopping all movement for a maximum of 3 seconds. A part of the sand that was flying around shot towards Raichu before encasing Raichu in sand. Rex, good, now use Sand Golem and end this. The remaining sand transformed into a smaller giant that still towered over Raichu and smashed its hand that had turned into a mace again towards Raichu. "Lieutenant!" Surge was screaming commands, but Raichu was encased in sand and couldn't hear. The mace landed and created a crater in the ground. In the middle was a sprawled Raichu who was barely conscious. Rex didn't give mercy and order for the golem to smash again, and so it did. It looked like a blacksmith smashing his hammer in a piece of metal in an attempt to flatten bumps. After another 5 hits, Raichu had long been knocked out. It would need intensive care for at least 2 weeks of recovery even by this world's standards. Rex didn't give mercy to merciless Pokémon, even if he had a soft spot for them. The battle was decided, and Lieutenant Surge attempted to hold his anger in as he returned the half-dead Raichu to his Pokeball. He treated others badly, but he cared for his Pokémon a lot. Rex, who saw this, shook his head. Rex Marshadow, break his legs. No quarter was to be given to this man. He wasn't attempting to be a hero. There were too many incidents like this in the world and he didn't have the time nor the energy to fix them all, but if he could help 1 or 2 who he could reach them, why not? A shadow sped towards Lieutenant Surge, who had just heard what Rex said, and before he could react, immense pain spread from his legs as his vision fell and he soon dropped to his knees. The shadow disappeared back into Rex's shadow under the stupefied and pained gaze of Lieutenant Surge. He never noticed the little monster in his shadow. Rex made his way over before stopping a meter away from Lieutenant Surge, towering above him. He crouched down slowly. "Rex, next time, when someone comes to your gym to learn, you will be softer with your teaching methods. You have talent, don't waste it being a loser. The uniform you wear is not meant for brutes and assholes. I don't want to have to stain it with your blood if I hear about you misbehaving. Do I make myself clear?" he said slowly while his voice got colder by the second. Lieutenant Surge shivered before nodding. Rex smiled contently and reached into Lieutenant Surge's breast pocket and got the badge he needed. "Rex, I will call the ambulance for you and that idiot receptionist of yours. I suggest you get yourself a new one," he said with an evil smile before walking towards the reception. Screams of pain could be heard before Rex walked out of the gym and took a breath of fresh air. "Rex, what a wonderful day," he said with a smile before walking away after calling the ambulance. He had deleted all of the camera footage in the gym with the help of the system. He then remembered the Pokesmall in Viridian City and grimaced before face-palming. He shook his head and walked away. Rex walked around the city. Since he had finished everything that needed to be done, all that was left was to enjoy his time for the day before leaving tomorrow. He was busy yesterday running around getting the evolution stuff, clothes and the date that ended badly. He got a brochure from the Pokémon Center so that he didn't have to run around like a headless chicken. The city was pretty big, and it had a lot in it. He decided to visit the tourist spots such as the Big Apricot, that was literally what its name implied, an apricot that was oversized. Then he visited the museum where he looked at a lot of ancient Pokémon fossils, which was interesting. He thought about getting a fossil Pokémon, but he didn't really need any of them since he had most if not all of their typings already covered. He didn't really strive for perfect type coverage since that was not necessary. He spent the rest of the afternoon at the beach off to the side. It was really enjoyable. He didn't really go into the water but sat on a beach chair and enjoyed the bright sun and released his Pokémon to play. Onyx instantly submerged himself in sand and only had its head sticking out as it enjoyed its rest. Marshadow didn't like the sun and hid in Rex's shadow as it continued to practice its energy manipulation that became harder due to the bright sun. It proved to actually serve as a form of training which gave Rex the idea of using Sunny Day to increase the difficulty of Marshadow's training. Marshadow could only sigh at its fate and distract itself with its training. Machoke looked like a lifeguard as he sat on Onyx's head with its arms crossed over his chest. Gyarados was splashing around before diving incredibly deep into the ocean as it began to battle everything that it deemed worthy. Growlithe ran around like a dog would on sand, enjoying its time. Weepinbell stood there motionless as it bathed in the sun beside Rex. Scyther, being the aloof character that he is, was grumpy and simply sat under the shade and trained silently. Machoke would ask Onyx to give him stones that he would later throw at Scyther, who would get agitated. Onyx didn't want to since it was the pacifist of the group, but under Machoke's pressure, it couldn't argue. Scyther tried everything. When he flew, Machoke would snipe him out of the air. When he ran, Machoke targeted Scyther's legs to trip him over. It caught Rex's attention as Machoke didn't miss once. It was like he had a sniper rifle strapped to his body. It was insane. Scyther had to move 300 meters away before Machoke could no longer hit accurately and left him alone. The sun soon started to set, and with it, the originally hot temperature lowered, and Rex was no longer comfortable staying there with all the wind. He called everyone back and headed to a restaurant for a good meal. He had been going to one that served Pokémon as well, which was located 5 minutes away from the hotel by bike. During dinner, Rex was thinking of where to go next. He needed to get a keystone for future use and therefore needed to head back to Pallet Town in order to achieve that. Therefore, after dinner, he went to the hotel and sat on a chair before calling Professor Oak. The call went through relatively quickly and Rex saw Oak slurping on some noodles. Oak. Rex, haven't heard from you in a while, how is everything? He asked happily. Rex, good overall. I was calling you to see if you knew what this was, he said as he held up Arcanine's Mega Stone. Oak dropped his noodles when he saw the stone and began to stutter. Oak, is that a Mega Stone? He exclaimed in shock. Rex acted surprised. Rex, is that what it is? Mr. Fuji gave it to me in Lavender Town before. I was wondering if you knew what it was. Oak, I see. Wait. Mr. Fuji, as in the Professor Fuji? He exclaimed. I nodded with a fake clueless expression. Oak, I see. That explains why you got it. Do you know for which Pokémon it's for? He asked curiously. Rex, Mr. Fuji didn't know, but he said that it was related to Blaine's Arcanine, so I can assume it's meant for Arcanine, he said with a shrug. Oak nodded in realization before showing an ecstatic expression. Oak, do you have an Arcanine to try it out on? He asked expectantly. Rex, I have a Growlithe that will evolve soon. I was thinking of stopping by the lab so you can help me with a problem. According to Blaine, he had no way of using it on his Arcanine, he said, faking a puzzled look. Oak smiled proudly and explained that he needed a keystone and all this and all that. Rex didn't bother to listen since he knew the details better than Oak did. After all, the system was better than any researcher. Rex, I see. Do you have a way of getting one of these keystones? He asked expectantly. Oak, luckily for you I can get you one. I suggest you make your back here and we can test out Mega Evolution, he said with a massive smile. I nodded and chatted with the old man for a while before hanging up. Growlithe was already ready to evolve and so was Weepinbell, and it was time to test out what effect the research the system found would have on the pair. Rex was very excited to see the result and would probably try it on Cinnabar Island since that was his next destination. He was thinking of taking on the gym but thought against it since he wanted to use Mega Arcanine against Blaine. It wasn't necessary and it came off as showing off, but who cares, Mega Evolution was Mega Evolution. Rex went to sleep after packing his bag and chucking everything into his inventory ready for the trip. He had already booked tickets on the ship that sailed towards the island earlier this morning, so there were no issues to deal with. In the Team Rocket base under Viridian City on a big chair in a wide room sat Giovanni with Jess's information, the autopsy results, the conclusion from the police and the fire department. They had found the origin of the fire. At the epicenter of the house, a small circle was left intact which showed signs of being the place where some type of blast went off. They concluded that there was foul play at hand but couldn't find any traces at all which led them to the culprit. The fire seemed to be so intense that it burned any traces there was, if any to begin with, away. Giovanni naturally knew who it was. He was notified of the agent being able to successfully neutralize the kid. He was happy about the result and sent the money over, but no longer than a couple of hours and he caught news of an explosion at the residence which Jess used for the operation. There were only two ways that this could happen. Either someone took revenge for the kid, or the kid is alive. He leaned towards the second since he was notified that it was indeed Jess's voice who confirmed. The only thing that was suspicious was that there was only one body recovered and that was Jess's. This presents him with more possibilities. If the kid was alive, then he was able to blow up the house in order to clear any evidence. No eyewitnesses were discovered, so it was not very high on his list. Another possibility was that if the kid was dead, then the person who took revenge took the kid's body away. Another less likely outcome was that the kid's body got turned to ash, but given that Jess was left resembling a human, there was little chance that the kid would be different. There were likely more possibilities, but for now, he was inclined to believe that someone took revenge for him. But that led him to another thought. Someone was with the kid. And he had no clue who it could be. He had sent Rocket members to Vermilion City to scout out and to investigate, but for now, it was too early for any results to pop up. He didn't believe that Rex was alive since Jess's voice was heard before the call reporting a confirmed kill. For now, he would leave it at that since that bossy little kid was going to arrive sometime in the next couple of weeks and he need to put things in order. He massaged his temples with an irritated look. After all, he had lost 50 million poke dollars. When he tried to trace it, he was sent for a loop that led nowhere and was forced to give up. It was still a lot of money to just be thrown away, so he guessed that whoever took Rex's body must have taken the money somehow. He could only shake his head with a sigh and turn to other things. At least he got the kid, so that was a plus. Thinking about that, he had a smile on his face. Rex, who inadvertently cleared himself of any suspicion, was sleeping soundly in his room. Rex woke up to the sound of a busy street, the clamor of people and the sound of a Pidgey by the window pecking at it with determination. Rex tossed and turned for a few minutes more before giving up on getting any more sleep. Rex got dressed and made sure to hack the hotel and delete any trace of him being there, and just in time as Team Rocket members were planning to search through hotel bookings for the past few days in a couple of hours. Rex exited the hotel and got on his bike and sped towards the cruise that was going to leave in an hour. He arrived 10 minutes and drove into an alley after making sure no one was paying attention. He then chucked his bike into his inventory along with his helmet, readjusted his grey suit and gloves, put some shades on and walked out and headed towards the reception room. He walked in, signed himself in before boarding the cruise and heading to his designated room. With 50 million in funds, who in their right mind would buy a normal room? No, he bought the most luxurious one. He really wanted to indulge in the life of a rich man since he only earned a modest wage in his last life, even as a general. There were some beautiful women on the cruise who turned to stare at him, but he was not interested in the least. Even though he seemed fine after what Nina just did, he wasn't intact. It still impacts someone when they are schemed against by someone they slept with. He would lay off the women for a while and enjoy the 3-day trip and enjoy his time with his Pokémon away from training. During this time though, Rex discovered that Marshadow was actually a little pervert. He acted all aloof and secluded like Scyther, but it was actually skulking around perving on women. Rex knew it didn't have a gender, so it was that much more interesting. He ignored it after a while since all it did was stay in the shadows and didn't cause him problems. Growlithe ran around Rex's legs as he walked around the ship, which earned a lot of stares from women who wanted to pet Growlithe. As Rex made his way over to get himself some food, he saw a very familiar figure. And he was stunned. The woman in front of him was Elisa, who was wearing a tight-fitting red dress that did absolutely nothing to hide her curves. But it wasn't a slutty dress, it was a summer dress with white flower patterns on it. That covered her nicely and gave off a mature vibe which enhanced her charm. Her red lipstick was further accentuated when in contrast to her black hair and snow-white skin. "Rex, pleasure seeing you here, Elisa," he said warmly. "Elisa, pleasure seeing you here as well, Rex," she said with a smile as they shook hands. "Rex, I didn't know that you were heading towards Cinnabar Island as well," he said with a little surprise. "Elisa, that was my next stop. I wanted to enjoy the hot springs that they have there. They say that it's great," she said with slight excitement. Rex couldn't help but laugh slight at her conduct before nodding. He had also heard that as well. "Rex, have you had lunch yet?" he asked courteously. Elisa shook her head before her stomach grumbled, which made Rex laugh while Elisa's face became a shade of pink out of embarrassment. "Rex, I will take that as my answer. Would you care to join me for lunch then?" "I was just on my way there myself," he said while extending his elbow towards Elisa. She looked at Rex before nodding with a smile and held on to his elbow happily as they walked towards the eating area. The duo didn't fail to catch the attention of the surrounding people. Women gave jealous looks while some men were angry at Rex and glared at him while others were lusting over Elisa. They both looked at each other before smiling awkwardly. Arriving at the eating area, they soon found a seat and ordered their meals before the waiter walked away with their menus. "Rex, what have you been doing since the last time we met?" he asked before taking a bite out of his burger. "Elisa, visiting several places. I went to Viridian City, then to Cerulean and saw this water show with these 3 beautiful ladies. There was also this one kid, his name was Ash if I recall correctly, and stayed to watch his battle. It ended up being a boring fight, sadly. I then came to Vermilion City but didn't stay for too long and decided to visit Cinnabar Island since it attracted me more," she said. After eating their lunch, they both walked towards the entertainment center where they watched a movie, played some arcade games and sat on the beach chairs and took in the evening sun. Rex met Zebstrika again, which upon seeing Rex flinched heavily and backed away. It seems that it had PTSD from its battle with Machoke. It didn't help when Machoke appeared behind it, creating a massive shadow. Rex saw how Zebstrika upon turning around jumped and ran away as fast as possible and hid behind Elisa. Rex saw Elisa's helpless look. "Elisa, you really owe me one. Zebstrika here has been scarred for life from its battle with your Pokémon. Not to mention it has gotten bigger and even stronger since last time," she said as she gazed up at the towering Machoke. Rex couldn't help but smile stiffly since it was technically his fault in a way, but at the same time, Zebstrika needed to get over it. As they walked back inside, they soon arrived at the accommodation area where all the rooms were located. Rex accompanied her to her room door before leaving. Before he left, they agreed to meet on the first floor area at 8 a.m. in the morning and spend the day together. Rex didn't actually go to bed and instead went to the top of the cruise ship and stood on the balcony. He looked out into the endless ocean. Rex system hack into the cruise guest information and cross-reference it with the Kanto public database. See if any of them are from Team Rocket, he said while looking up at the moon. Roger, system will report to host in 5 hours, it said mechanically. Rex was happy with the results since it would take a while to get all of that done. He was starting to crack down on his own security and made sure to take full advantage of the system's abilities. Rex also, check Alice's background, see if she is who she says she is, he said in his head after some thought. Roger. Rex then jumped over the railing and dived into the water. He had taken his clothes off and put them into his inventory while in the air and only left his boxers. He went for a swim. He could no longer be classified as a normal human being. He could hold his breath for 10 minutes at a time and had super strength at this point. He pulled out his pokeball and called out Gyarados. Gyarados, upon seeing Rex in the water, was elated and swam around him. Marshadow still hid in his shadow. It was nice and dry and didn't have to worry about the environment. Rex grabbed onto Gyarados and told it to dive down to the depths. It was about 500 meters down when they finally touched rock bottom. Rex then stood on the seafloor and felt the pressure from the water and nodded in satisfaction. He had left a tracker on the ship, so there was no problem, and therefore concentrated on training his body in a new way according to the system. This would increase his defense, sturdiness and strength. It was an all-around increase which was hard to come by these days. He needed a psychic type so that he could intensify the gravity. That would be incredibly useful to training not only for him but for his Pokémon as well. He naturally picked the best choice available, even when compared to most other regions' psychic types. This Pokémon stood above them all. He even consulted the system and had it do research on creating the Mega Stone for it, since it wasn't reasonable to think that it existed when the Pokémon didn't exist until a few years ago. That's right, Rex was after Mewtwo and its Mega Evolution form, more specifically its Mega Y form. It would be a monstrous addition to his team and the final Pokémon to complete his Kanto team. As Rex sat there under the surmounting pressure from the depths of the ocean, he revolved his aura all over his body with difficulty. He spent about 7 minutes like this before standing up and crouching down and revolved his aura. He suddenly jumps up, creating cracks in the ocean floor before zooming upwards. Gyarados, who was silently lying beside him, got up and swam next to Rex, who soon grabbed on and headed towards the surface. They breached the surface of the ocean, creating a huge splash as waves surged. Rex stood on Gyarados's head as he looked at the cruise ship sailing slowly. It had already traveled 3 kilometers from where he dived in from. Rex smiled, sucked in a lungful of air and dived back down into the water, speeding back towards the ocean floor. He didn't stop at his original spot, he went deeper. There was a ledge where he sat before that overlooked an even bigger chasm full of nothing but an empty abyss. Barely any Pokémon could be seen by coral that plagued the seafloor like a forest. Some whale lords could be seen moving around, Gyaradoses who could come over only to be scared shitless by his Gyarados. There were Magikarp, Goldeen, Shelders, Cloysters, Staryu and Starmies. It was magical. He saw around as the Pokémon kept their distance but looked at him with curiosity. After all, barely any human had traveled to such depths. He didn't stop and kept diving before stopping at the 600-meter mark where the pressure threatened to crush him. He smiled and sat there before practicing again. Another 7 minutes passed and Rex was reluctant to keep doing this and thought of a solution. He soon figured one out and ushered Gyarados over and made him create a bubble of sorts that kept the water out. Gyarados nodded and did as told and created a bubble to keep the water out. Rex smiled happily and walked inside where fresh air could be felt. Rex sat there for a few minutes catching his breath before walking out again. He repeated the process but pushed his body to the limit, staying in the water for a full 10 minutes every time. He found it harder and harder to do everything as his body fatigued from the constant training. After an hour, Rex thought that it was enough and hopped on Gyarados' back and sped towards the surface. The same scene that happened before repeated itself. A blood-red Gyarados emerged from the depths like a monster out of hell, and on its head, a human with his arms crossed and a smile on his face. He could no longer see the ship and therefore asked the system to project a map on the region and show him where he was and where the boat was. He soon found the direction he was meant to go in and zoomed forward as Gyarados' body rammed against the massive waves. The water splashed all over Rex, which only served to make him smile wider. "Rex, this is life, Gyarados, ha ha, I love this feeling, go faster," he said as he urged Gyarados to go faster. Gyarados was having fun as well and began to go even faster as it became a blur of red mimicking a speedboat. They soon caught up the ship and boarded it before Rex recalled Gyarados. Marshadow, who had been with him the whole time, emerged from his shadow and sped off to do his perverted things like usual. Rex could only shake his head before walking to his room. Elisa, who had been standing on the balcony of her room, spotted a red blur speeding towards the boat and took out her Pokeball that held Luxray, her ace Pokémon. But her face changed color when she saw the size of it. A massive 14-meter-tall blood-red menacing Gyarados came near the boat. But what shocked her more was the man on its head. A bare-chested, chiseled body, silver hair and blue-eyed Rex who boarded the boat after getting close enough. Elisa was shocked at the power radiating from the Gyarados he was standing on just a minute ago. She thought that Machoke was strong, but after seeing Gyarados she was left speechless. But it had been a long time since they had last seen each other. She didn't want to think about what Machoke could have become. Just the thought of it sent a shiver down her spine. She began to doubt whether or not she could beat him now, much less after Machoke evolved into a Machamp. After all, Machamps are ferocious Pokémon that usually have a place among the top when in the wild, regardless of the environment. Machoke was already strong enough without extra arms. She shivered even more intensely after thinking about what 2 additional ones could accomplish. She shook her head in an attempt to get rid of the scary image forming and turned towards her room before walking in. Rex, who had just boarded, was oblivious to Elisa watching him and headed to the kitchen for a late-night snack before going to bed for the day. He had a long and relaxing day tomorrow and he didn't want to be plagued by sleepiness. The roars of Gyarados woke Rex up with a jump. He felt disoriented before realizing he was on the cruise. He stood up, got changed into his suit, but was quite messy and untidy as he rushed to the balcony to see what happened. He was surprised to see 4 blue 8-meter-tall Gyarados throwing out hyper beams at the boat as the trainers tried desperately to stop them. He even saw Elisa with her Luxray throwing out thunderbolts in an attempt to stop the beams from hitting the public. Rex cursed his luck. He was still tired from his training and the first thing he sees is a bunch of dumbass Pokémon attacking the ship. He shook his head in annoyance and returned to his room and tidied up his once messy look while the tremors continued to rock the ship. Rex walked out of his room with a skip and quickly but steadily made his way over to the top of the ship. He stood there overlooking the area and saw the desperate battle going on. Elisa was hanging on just barely. She was strong, very strong, but she was facing 4 strong Gyarados who were blasting hyper beams at the same time. There was only so much she could do. She even sent out Zebstrika, but it still didn't change the situation. Everyone else was not strong enough and there were unconscious Pokémon everywhere on the ship. Rex couldn't help but sigh. He snapped his fingers, and a shadow that was watching the fight with interest quickly rushed towards Rex unbeknownst to everyone. "Rex Marshadow, this will be your very first fight, show me how much you have improved," he said with a smile. The eyes in his shadow burned brighter as it flew into the distance before merging into the shadows. Rex jumped down from the balcony after surveying the situation and made his way to the forefront segment of the ship. "Rex Marshadow, use Thunder Punch on the closest Gyarados," he said. The Gyarados he was targeting was one that was charging up a hyper beam at the moment. Marshadow, who looked at the Gyarados Rex was targeting and nodded before speeding towards it. He jumped from shadow to shadow, turning into a blur before a cacophony of birds chirping could be heard. Marshado's hand turned bright blue as electric sparks jumped in the air from time to time. If Marshadow could speak, Rex was sure it would scream out Chidori. He laughed at the thought as he witnessed the impact. Marshadow had been training under Machoke constantly and it had learned a ton from him. Marshadow was a dedicated Pokémon that earned Machoke's respect. The impact not only stopped the charging hyper beam but sent the giant Gyarados flying out of the water. It only landed back in after 20 meters, causing giant waves to surge and crash onto the ship a few moments later. An unconscious Gyarados floated up to the surface after a few seconds. The entire scene was silent. Even the other Gyarados stopped their attacks and looked towards the little Pokémon on the knocked-out Gyarados's head. Marshadow stood there silently observing the other 3 while waiting for a command from Rex. Rex had instilled heavy discipline into his Pokémon. He believed that a well-trained, obedient Pokémon who is treated with respect will be able to perform to their utmost capability. And this method proved to be true. An example could be seen in front of him. Rex nodded happily at the outcome before deciding to try out the new move it had been training on. "Rex Marshadow, use Shadow Domain," he said with a nasty grin that frightened some of the other trainers. Elisa was looking on expectantly as this was yet another move she had never seen before. Marshadow, who heard Rex, got excited and began to gather energy into his body, which caused the surrounding temperature to drop. It was the feeling you get when you are in a haunted house, the feeling some people describe when a ghost is around. The temperature got colder and colder until the water in a cup froze. People started to shiver slightly, but before they could complain, a massive silent energy radiated out like a nuclear blast. An almost abyssal black curtain draped over the surrounding 50 meters, stopping everyone from seeing anything from outside. It was a move similar to electric terrain, grassy terrain and so on. He thought about it when he saw how Marshadow liked to hang out in the shadows constantly. The system worked out the fine details and created this move. The only thing was that unlike terrain moves, this one consumes the energy of the user at a fast pace. It was more of an active ability with a high cost. But it was monstrously effective. Within the domain, Marshadow was a god. No one could touch him since he could meld into the shadows at any time. It was pitch black and only the people who Marshadow allowed to look inside could see anything. The Gyaradoses who were covered in the darkness began to panic, but before long a painful roar was heard from one of the remaining 3 as more birds chirping could be heard before the crackle of thunder. Then another massive splash. The 2 remaining Gyarados were not stupid Pokémon and decided to swim away at maximum speed. They soon exited the pitch-black dome and didn't even turn back. Marshadow undid the move and could be seen panting heavily as it observed the last two swimming away. "Rex, well done, come back and take a rest," he said with a wide smile. He was happy with the result. It could be used as a trump card of sorts. It was incredibly draining, but it would guarantee victory unless used against another ghost Pokémon. Marshadow disappeared and reappeared beside Rex before being recalled back into his Pokeball for some rest. Rex turned around and walked back to his room since it would be a while before the kitchen was open again. Elisa watched Rex's back with shock. She thought that having two monstrous Pokémon would be the limit, but seeing what Marshadow had accomplished, she was sure that she wouldn't be able to do anything against it. But she did see how drained it was afterwards. There was a counter. But against someone who didn't know it beforehand, they would be doomed to lose for sure. She wondered what other monsters he was hiding. She was also even more curious about him. The next day went by just like all the others. Rex and Elisa spent time hanging out with their Pokémon. Today was the last day before they would arrive at Cinnabar Island. Rex spent the night on the seafloor like the past 2 days, training alongside Gyarados. It was a very productive time for both of them. Rex was able to sense aura outside of his body completely and finally stepped through the third layer of his training. He was now on the last stage of his training before he could form weapons out of aura, use telepathy and other abilities aura users could use. Upon getting through the last stage, he made his way up to the boat again and stepped into his room to find Machoke sitting there looking at him with a wide smile. Rex replicated it and they fist bumped each other. They could feel each other's aura at a maximum of 100 meters away, which was quite large. The last stage involved being able to manipulate the energy in the surroundings to do your bidding. It was going to be hard to accomplish, but the system said that it was similar to the second stage of maneuvering the energy in your body. So it wasn't that long of a stage. It was more of a stage you got faster but took lots of time to master since it had a much bigger threshold. He went to sleep soon after and didn't wake up until the sound of the cruise ship reverberated throughout the entirety of the ship. Rex got up with a jump and rubbed his eyes for a second before getting up and changing into his black three-piece suit. He walked down to the breakfast area and looked around in an attempt to spot Elisa. He soon found her in an elegant green dress and shades as she held her phone in her hand, seemingly reading something. Rex made his way over and said hello before sitting down opposite her. "Rex, what are you reading?" he asked as he buttered his bread before taking a bite. Elisa looked up at Rex before turning her phone around to show him. On it showed the news about Jess's death and the burned house. The police reported foul play. An ongoing investigation was being held, but no clues have been found so far. Rex wasn't so surprised about it since it had been a good few days since the accident took place. He also wasn't surprised at the lack of evidence. After all, the system took out all the surrounding cameras' records of his stay and anything that might prove to be suspicious that may lead to him. There was simply nothing to be worried about, and therefore, upon seeing the news, acted surprised or curious and then shook his head. "Rex, it's a shame they seem to have found nothing so far," he said. Yesterday he had reviewed the data the system had given him on the people he wanted searched, including Elisa, who came out clean, which set his mind at ease. There were no Team Rocket members, which was also good, and therefore had a good time worry-free. Elisa nodded her head with a frowning expression. "Elisa, I wonder what happened, who might have done that and for what reason?" she voiced, seemingly asking herself more than she was asking Rex. He only shrugged. "Rex, there could be a multitude of reasons, many of which we might not think of, we can only hope that they are found soon, he said convincingly before finishing his breakfast and getting up. The PAR system turned on. Ladies and gentlemen, we are happy to inform you that we have arrived at Cinnabar Island. We hope you enjoyed your stay and please leave a review for future customers. Have a happy journey. The PAR system turned off and everyone made their way to their room to pack up their things. Rex, being in the military for so many years, didn't have too much to pack up and quickly walked out. He carried a small suitcase for show and was actually empty apart from a spare pair of boxers and a grey suit, since everything else was in his inventory. He soon met up with Elisa again at the gate where the boat and land would meet. "Elisa, I wonder when we will meet again?" she asked while looking at him. "Rex, well, I owe you another battle, don't I? We will meet again very soon. I will be stopping by Saffron City sometime in the near future. I don't know if we will meet there or some other place, but until then, have a safe journey," he said before kissing her cheek and walking away with a small bag hung over his shoulder. Elisa held her cheek with a flushed face. She stared at his back until his silhouette disappeared into the large mass of people. "Elisa, I look forward to it." Her whisper fading as she walked away with a gentle smile. Rex, who didn't know any of this, walked into an empty alleyway that blocked the street view and took out his road bike and got on it. The roar of the engine could be heard as if greeting Rex after a long time apart. Rex caressed his bike with a smile before rushing onto the road with a wheelie and speeding off toward the city where he would stay for a day. He was thinking of visiting the abandoned mansion where Mr. Fuji once worked. Who knew if there was anything interesting there that could be of use to him? Rex woke up the next day nicer refreshed. He took a cold shower, which the system analyzed the benefits of. It increases blood circulation, increased the healthiness of hair and skin, and tempered his willpower. It was difficult to be in ice-cold water for 10 minutes. He had been doing this since he got on the cruise as a new extra, little training for himself. After hopping out, he got changed into a navy blue 3-piece suit with a nice watch, milk chocolate-colored leather shoes, a burgundy-colored tie and nicely combed hair. It all started with how you presented yourself. He didn't mind the causal white coat and black underneath, but it wasn't too much to his style. Suits would always resonate with him. He soon walked out of his room and booked the ship that sailed towards Pallet Town for tomorrow before hopping on his boat and zooming off into the forest. The system had scanned the internet for the location and Rex found out that it was deeply hidden in the forest. Not too many people knew about it, but it wasn't exactly a secret. They simply knew that it was an abandoned mansion. The secret lay underneath. The system has reported activity underneath the mansion, which intrigued Rex instantly. He put on a black Oni mask that he bought a while ago since he liked the design. "Rex Marshadow, find the room underneath the mansion and the door that leads down," he said calmly as he began to look around without a rush. There was a lot of random papers with any patterns strewn across the floor. Within Rex's shadow, a pair of red eyes appeared and floated up before forming a small 0.7-meter tall ghost Pokémon. It nodded at Rex before seeping into the floor with a playful expression. Marshadow dived under the ground and soon came to an opening where a small, cramped corridor was seen. It was dimly lit, and shelves of documents were stacked on either side, making the already cramped room even tighter. Marshadow was obviously not obstructed by this and made his way forwards where he heard the sound of an old man talking. Marshadow saw a man with grey long messy hair, a worn-out lab coat and broken glasses. He looked like a mad scientist. Marshadow didn't pay too much attention to what he was saying and simply looked for the entry to the underground laboratory-looking facility. He found benches with dead Pokémon on them, some in a big tube with liquid and a lot of information flashing on a bunch of screens giving Marshadow a headache. After 10 minutes of searching, he finally found it and seeped through the door and signaled Rex to come over. Rex had already put the cameras on loop since otherwise it would ruin his chances of getting anything. He thought about finding the opening via the blueprint in the information that the underground facility kept, but it wasn't there, so he was forced to search manually. Rex nodded at Marshadow, who went back into this shadow after completing its task. Rex found the door that looked like a wall and pressed his hand on it before the door opened. Rex leisurely made his way down, where he soon came upon the same cramped corridor full of notes, documents and who knows what. He squeezed his way through and soon arrived at the first lab, where a dead Pokémon was laying on the table half dissected. Rex looked at it for a good minute before looking away. Rex system search for life signatures pertaining to humans, he said in his head as he stood there behind a wall with his eyes closed. System has found one signature matching host's description, it said mechanically. Rex nodded. Rex, where is it? He asked. Second room to your left, it said succinctly. Rex didn't waste any time and took out Weeping Bill, who released a massive cloud of sleeping powder in the air. The old man who was typing away merrily a second ago was now on the floor with his half-closed eyes staring at a man emerging from the cloud of sleeping powder with an Oni mask. Rex had got the system to design it for multiple uses, such as underwater breathing, stopping toxic gases and powders like just now, and modulating his voice. He felt like Batman. It was naturally all done in a rentable factory that had a lot of room. He picked up the unconscious old man and sat him on a chair before getting Weeping Bill to guard him while he walked over to the massive computer system with large screens filtering large amounts of information. Rex, what is all this? He asked. Information on the evolution of Pokémon gathered by some type of organization. Traces of Team Rocket have been recorded, but there seems to be some form Huen, Sinnoh, Unova, Coloss, Alola, and Galadot. It said to the shock of Rex. Rex, how much can we access? He asked quickly. Not much at all. This server pertains to the research material named Code, Mewtwo. It said. Rex, what can you get from this? Anything interesting? He asked with a trace of disappointment. It seemed that it was a small server that was once part of a bigger one before being abandoned. System can extract information that may prove to be vital in fixing the temperamental issue within Mewtwo based on the host's memories, it said to the surprised Rex. This was a big issue he was plagued with after choosing Mewtwo as his last partner. It was genetically modified, a new Pokémon, but a flawed one. It had issues that until recently seemed to be incurable. There was also the issue of trying to convince Mewtwo of joining him, but it seems he's got his answer, 2 birds 1 stone. Rex, how long will it take you to find a solution? He asked. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Also make sure you tell me your recommendation in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.